Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. In today's video, I'm going to set this bad girl up for off-grid ready 12-volt setup, which you can use for your next trip. Hello everyone and welcome back to the shed. As you can see, we've got the box off the car at the moment, which is going to make life a little bit easier for doing the work. The most important thing when you're going camping is beer. The second most important thing by default ends up being the fridge, and the fridge needs power to run. Now in the past, I have just run a 12-volt twin core wire from the battery to the tray, bang, Robert's father's brother. But being that this is a nice new Canopy and I can remove it, I'd like to have something that's a little bit more dedicated to the task. So over here is basically the foundations for my dual battery system that's going to be going into the Canopy. If I do pull the Canopy off the ute and go on an adventure for the day and leave that set up at camp, still going to have a battery and charging system in place to keep all of my stuff running in my absence. Now, it's also going to be a fairly basic system because my wallet is hurting. It's going to be fairly basic and done on a budget. However, if you've been around here for a while, you know that we aren't going to half-ass a job. It's going to be done nice. It's going to be done properly and using usually quality components. Now, in this case, the majority of the system is going to be backed by the KICKASS brand. I haven't used their stuff before, and to be honest, the charger and battery have literally been sitting on my shelf in the garage for about 5 years. The original plan was to have it mounted behind the back seat in my D-Max and having it set up that way. But I've just been, I want to say too busy, too lazy is probably more accurate, but you know, I've had other things on the go, as you can probably tell. But in saying that, it has been sitting on the shelf for 5 years. I put a multimeter on the battery and it was still reading 12.5 volts, which is actually super surprising. So put it on charge overnight. She's back up to full, ready to fight another day. Now, I'm not going to give you a full rundown of each individual bits and pieces here early in the video. I hate it when people do that. So I'll give you a bit more of a rundown on each product as they become a little bit more applicable. But I think you guys get the gist. We've got a deep cycle battery, DC-DC charger. I've got a bit of a switch panel there to run some accessories, which I'll mention a little bit later. It's the 12-volt outlets to keep all of my gear charged, and a couple of, I guess, one or two little batteries here and there. Here is a cardboard template that I kind of started with because I'm going to be making a bit of a 12-volt board up here in the Canopy. So cut to make sure that I've got all the notches in the right space and whatever, which I can then transfer through to plyboard. And I also started sort of mocking up where I want to put all of my bits and pieces there on the board. I could also sort of visualize and draw on there, a bit of a pathway on how I'm going to run all of my wiring, trying to, keep it somewhat neat and tidy where possible. I want to keep this thing super serviceable. So I could take this vehicle in some of the most remote locations in the country. And if something were to go a little bit pear-shaped, say with the system, I want to be able to have good access to be able to rectify the problem easily and quickly. So I'm going to show you a couple of tips and tricks along the way with that. However, if you are new here and you want a little bit more info on my 1650mm dog section Canopy from TC Boxes, you can click a link up here where you can see our previous video and you can see my little adventure spending the day up at Auto Spec 4x4 where I picked up the Canopy, we installed it, and I give you a bit of a review on the box itself. Spoiler alert. Pretty happy with it so far. But for now, it's probably important for me to get stuck into things and actually get a wriggle on, because I've literally got days before I leave on my trip with my family. Actually, by the time you see this, I've probably been and come back home already. I should probably stop talking and get stuck into it. And in the interest of making things get along a little bit quicker, here is my 12-volt board. So this is just made out of some 12mm non-structural ply. Good, not great. I don't know if you can really see on the camera, but it's a little bit wavy. It's not super straight, but it is fairly strong and it is fairly cheap. So it's a good option for doing this kind of thing. It's not going to be exposed to the elements, so it probably doesn't need to be marine ply or structural board. It's literally just to hold things up on the wall. But getting into this point was more of a case of measure twice, cut thrice. You'll be able to see Me going through circular saw, jigsaw, cutting out all the notches and things, making sure that it does fit nicely in the canopy space. And then I also went through and started picking out where it was that I wanted all of my accessories to be placed on board. Sort of, once again, measure twice, cut thrice, undersized some of the holes and had to bore them back out again, but not too bad. And then gave it all one, I guess, final mock-up fitment into the canopy to make sure that everything was to suit properly and be functional for the most important part. Function over fashion. It does have to look nice, but it has to function. That's the most important part. I'm pretty happy with the final product. Overall, it's going to be a nice, clean space to use, and there's also plenty of room for expansion as well. Couple of little tips for you though. Because I am going to be carpeting this, you need to make sure that you do have a good bit of gap around the outside, and I'll show you what I mean very shortly. All right, so in she is, and you can see that I've left what could be seen as a bit of an unsightly gap around the edges, all the way around here as well. You need space for your carpet to be able to wrap around, unless you're going to cut it flush with the corners and risk it peeling away over time. You need to make sure that you've got a little bit of gap there so that when you wrap the carpet around, it will then occupy all of those little spaces that you've left. Do not discount that you need to do that. Some people like a really tight fitting board, and I don't blame you. I think it's a good thing. But you can fix it with, tech screws and things like that. So do leave yourself that little bit of room. Obviously not too much. You don't want to have nasty gaps when you're done. Just something to be mindful of. Depending on your carpet, I'm using an automotive carpet. It's a little bit thinner than marine carpet because this is not going to have any foot traffic. It's literally just hanging up on the wall. We can afford to go with a slightly thinner carpet that maybe doesn't have as good a wear, but once again, I'm not walking on it, so it doesn't matter. Next tip that I've got is, when I flip this down, with some offcuts from the ply, I made myself these little bits of standoff. So I've got 12mm spacers that are located perfectly where all these braces go on the backboard, so I can screw through the board into those. But what that's going to do is it's going to space the board off a little bit and give me some nice room to run wires from one side to the other around all of that 40x40 bracing without having to drill through it and putting, conduit and things like that. I'll be able to secure wiring to the back of the board and run it through the gap which is provided by each of those spaces there. So that's probably just another little tip. Is it going to cost you some room? Yes, but is 12mm further out going to be the end of things? I highly doubt it. In fact, when you have these sitting up here, most people would probably have a fridge sort of in this area, and you're probably not going to be able to have the fridge all the way over to the edge of the wall because you won't be able to open the door because you've got that void there. So do yourself a favor. I think it's well worth it. Give yourself that little bit of extra space. When you do have all of your stuff mocked up on the board, you can run wires, just grab scrap bits of wire and sort of run it from point A to point B very loosely, just to make sure that you're definitely not going to run into any sort of roadblocks. Nothing worse than spending a couple of hours on a project only to have to undo half of it and re-engineer the project. It's just not fun. So where I'm up to now is carpeting the board. Not only is it going to make it look a lot nicer, it's going to help with some acoustics and a little bit of insulation as well. Much more appealing than bland plywood. This is a charcoal color, and like I say, it's a little bit thinner than the marine ply stuff, and it's a little bit more pliable, so you can sort of fold it a little bit easier. Now with a small piece like this, it's best to sort of just do it flat. Don't try and lay the carpet over the board. You'll probably end up with wrinkles and things like that. What I would recommend is to lay the carpet down, apply the glue, and then apply the board to the carpet. I've had a much better success rate that way. If you guys have got any tips you'd like to leave in the comments below, please do. I'd love to hear it. But for this job, I'm just going to be using some of the trusty Selly's Quick Grip contact adhesive, and I'll also be using the bargain basement staple gun from the Big Green Shed. Probably enough for the chit chat. Let's get stuck into some action. What do you reckon? Good morning. It's a new day. And last night, I kind of ended up somewhere around here. Look, if I'm being honest, I've actually already recorded all of this, but my microphone didn't work. So let's just pretend you didn't see any of this wiring, okay? It's just our little secret. That bit's coming next. But let's just, all right. So the board is carpeted, left the glue overnight to dry after I remounted my accessories and things like that. But I do want to show you guys exactly what I was talking about with the gap around the board and how the carpet takes it up. I thought I was being pretty generous with my gaps, so let's test fit this in there and I'll show you guys, just how much gap is left over once we're done. She's tight. It's a tight fit. And like I said, I thought I was being pretty generous with the gaps that I left before I put the carpet in. There was quite large gaps around those 40 by 40 braces and a pretty large gap around the top there. However, now with the carpet on there, you can see it's actually a really tight fit. I'm having to bang it in there. And it's quite hard to wedge back out again. So it depends on what carpet that you're using. Like I said, I'm using automotive carpet, which is a bit thinner than marine carpet. But if marine carpet's what you've got, then leave even more gap again. The carpet's about 6 mil. You got 6 mil at the top, 6 mil at the bottom. So yeah, in some cases, depending on what thickness of material you're using, you could leave up to a 15 mil gap around and still fill it in very easily with carpet. Now, what can you do if you haven't cut it the right size and it's not going to fit? You could cut flush along the edge. You see where we've wrapped it around, you cut it so that it's flush at the front there. That means you don't have any material going over the top, but then you will risk sort of delaminating that carpet because it's not being pulled around and secured on the backside. You could then secure it with staples on the front, but you're probably going to see them, but there are ways around it. However, now that you know, take it into account and make sure that you've got enough space there for once you put carpet in. I've basically got a pretty simple setup. So we've got a fuse box. Like I say, ignore this. So we've got this fuse box. This is just a 6-way PowerTech fuse panel. It has positive and a negative bus bar as well. So I'll just have to run one thick cable to there, and then all my power will be distributed. It'll be all fused circuits to all of my accessories, which is really handy and convenient. Also, LED lights, so that if you do blow a fuse, it'll light up that light and you'll know which one to replace. Most of the stuff is going to go from this fuse panel to this switch block. This switch block and accessory panel I bought through Switch Boss on eBay. Not a sponsor, could be, hit me up. I bought the panel and I bought each switch individually. So I've got fridge auxiliary power, which will turn on this panel here. Music, this will be for when I hook up maybe a stereo at a later date, and my interior light. Nice and easy. This is a dual voltage monitor. You can see on there it's got main battery at the top, auxiliary bolt at the bottom. It's just going to give me a nice, easy, quick reference to keep an eye on what my batteries are doing. So yeah, and it just fills the gap real nicely. I've got a 3 amp quick charge, like dual USB here. Usually they come with like a 1 amp and a 2.1 amp. This is a dual 3 amp quick charge, which is good. I've got a dual 4 amp type C quick charge as well. And then I've just got your ordinary cigarette lighter socket. It's really easy to have one of those because it's fairly universal. You can get a SIG socket adapter for most things. So leave your options open. And then this Anderson plug is on that switch there for my fridge. So yeah, I'll end up putting an Anderson plug on my fridge into there. This over here I'll talk about a little bit later on when it's a bit more relevant. And this here is a remote control panel for an inverter. I did get suckered in by an online sale that KICKASS had, and I talked myself into buying a 2000 watt 240 volt inverter. This here arrived, which is the remote panel, but my inverter is yet to come. So where's my inverter, KICKASS? Where's it at? I'm assuming it must be on back order, but haven't got an email to that effect yet. But I'm glad that this arrived because it means I was able to lay it out with the rest of my stuff. Eventually I'll be mounting it probably just up there, which would be above the battery, which would be sitting down there. So inverter, battery, 12-volt panel. These are expansions for the future. All right, it's time to start wiring up all of these switches because I haven't done that yet. I haven't done any wiring yet. There's still a little bit left to go, but yeah, we'll get into some wiring. Thinking it's all wired up, Jeff, but what about all these loose bits? Well, I want this to be as serviceable as possible. Those leads are going out to interior lights, canopy door lights, and a possible future stereo system. But what happens if something goes pear and I need to be able to remove this board in a hurry? These are just like a weather pack connector. They are waterproof or water resistant. Not that they should have to put up with any water anyway, being that they will be inside the canopy and the canopy has a seal net on it. 4 of these, so that when I do have to take that out, all I have to do is just go clip, 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 pull the board out, happy days. Let's have a look at the backside and check out Spaghetti Junction. Fairly neat if I do say so myself. You can see I went to the extra effort of getting cable clips and securing everything nice and neatly. You don't want the cable to be rattling around. You don't want it to be chafing anywhere. So the best way to do that is to make sure it's well secured. And in this case, I think we've got it nailed down. So the only other cables to go are the power and the earth for the fuse block. I've got a positive post and a negative post there. Let's try and also keep things fairly minimal on the outside of the board and try and keep as much contained on the backside as possible. So I'm going to have a common earth point. That'll be for the fuse block and the charger and all that. And then that will then go to the negative side of the battery. Same thing here. I'm just going to have one positive coming from the battery to the back of the board. And then from here, we'll split out to where we need to go. Just saves you having like 4 or 5 different terminals going through to the battery. So we'll just have one fat cable to there. Something to consider with that though, if you are going to use a central or common positive or negative post, you need to take into account total amp draw of everything. So you can't just run, say, the same size power wire from the post to the fuse block as you would to the battery, because I'm also going to have the DCDC charger in there, more amperage. Same thing with the earth. Whatever you're going to draw in power, you need to be able to have in earth. All of your cables are going to have an amp rating. This is 16 gauge, so this is all for very light duty stuff. LED lights, radios, things like that don't use much. This is a 10 gauge wire for the fridge, which that's going to draw, a bit more amperage. Or even if I was to unplug the fridge and plug something else into that Anderson plug, we can have up to about 30 amps circuit load if we wanted to there. So what I'll need to do is add up each circuit. There's 6 circuits there. Let's say we average at about 20 amps per circuit. It won't be that. Overestimate everything. You need about 120 amps worth. So I'm probably going to use something like this. It's pretty heavy gauge, 4 gauge wire. I know that this will be rated to about, I think it's about 130 amps for a short run like we're going to be doing. So that gives me plenty of headroom. I'll be running that from the battery to the common negative, and then I've got, like I say, heaps of headroom. For that, say we work on a max, like total max of 120 amps out of the fuse block, and then 20 amps or 25 amps for the DC-DC charger. 145. This here will do the job. It's not going to melt. It's not going to burn the car down. So I just mentioned the DC-DC charger. Here it is, 25 amp DC-DC plus solar charger from KICKASS. It has a 4-stage charging. So you got bulk absorption, float, and pulse. So that will then take power from the starter battery and from the alternator when we're driving to charge the deep cycle battery that's going to be in the Canopy. It's also got that solar input, so I can plug a solar blanket in or put a solar panel on top of the Canopy if I wish, and it will charge that way. This one does have an alternator priority. There are some that do have a solar priority. This one's an alternator priority, so if the car is running, it's going to take preference over that than the solar panel. If you're going to have like 600 or 800 watts of solar, you might want to get a different unit that does have a solar priority. For me, not having a dedicated solar setup, this is going to be the go. And then if I am parked up for long periods of time, I can just plug a solar panel in. So that's going to be the next port of call, is to mount this on the board, which I've already selected my spot up there. And then I'm going to run these wires on the back side. I'll give you a quick rundown on those once she's all mounted up, what is necessary and what is not necessary. These are super simple though, and you'll see that in just a moment. Jumped ahead a little bit. I figured you've all seen just about enough of me crimping and heat shrinking for one day, because I know I've had enough of doing it. But here we are, all done at the back. If I flip it over, DC-DC charger is mounted with the wires just poking through that hole there. Now I know if you're like me, it's probably going to do your head in that I've mounted it and the logo is sitting upside down. Problem is, this is going to be the side over here where the canopy is open, and I want to be able to see all of those status lights to see if there's any faults or whatever along the way, and just keep an eye on everything. So unfortunately, that's how it's got to be. And whilst it can do a lot of things, this is just how simple it is to wire up. Now, it looks like a bit of a mess, but bear with me. Alternator in. So that goes from our alternator into the charger. Solar power in. So our solar power, this is an ignition wire. Now the ignition wire is quite important, particularly for modern vehicles. Older vehicles, the alternator just charges flat out at about 14.4 volt. Newer vehicles have what they call a smart alternator, which if it senses that the battery is full, it starts dialing back its charge so that you're putting a bit less electrical load on the engine and saving a bit more fuel. Problem with that is if it thinks that the front battery is full, then it's going to stop charging the rear battery or dial it right back, even though you might have a bunch of accessories that are running flat out. So if you've got this ignition trigger wire here, it's going to just power up your DC-DC charger, much like an amplifier. If you had an amplifier and a subwoofer, it always had a power wire and an ignition wire. So then that way, once you turn the key on, it powers up the amp. Same deal here with the charger. And then the last wire here, this brown one, is our output to go to our auxiliary battery, which I've gone down to this positive post. Now you can see that I've got a couple of Anderson plugs there. Remember, I've said I want this to be as serviceable as possible. This is going to be a quick way to disconnect the DC-DC charger if I have to remove the board. So what that means is I now have to get these two plugs to join to the outside of my canopy. See this little 3D printed magic thing? This holds my 3-pin Anderson plug and a 2-pin Anderson plug. which I've already picked a spot somewhere about here. Nice and easy for me to get to when it's against the headboard. And then drill holes through there for my wires to go through. I'll be able to unplug, plug in, nice and easy. Just another quick before we go. You can see this is the power wire coming off that positive terminal to go to my fuse block. This is a negative. I know it's red, but look, it's got black on it. That goes to the negative bus bar. And you can see we've got negative from the alternator, negative from the solar, negative from the charger. And then this goes around to the front here. Now, this little unit is called a battery shunt or a battery monitor, depending on what your accent is. What that's going to do is it's going to track all of the power that's going in or out of my auxiliary battery. So if I'm charging on solar, it's going to tell me. If it's drawing from the fridge or whatever, it's going to tell me. That's also going to give me a state of charge, you know, voltage, roughly how much longer charge I've got left, etc., etc. Super handy little bit of kit, and you can, you know, get ones that hook up to a screen, which some people have put the screen over here. That one there is a Bluetooth one, so I just download the Victron app and then track it on my phone. Let's put that final bit of wiring from the Canopy to the positive, and then after that we can start hooking up a battery. And we're nearly there. Very tight, thick. It's not. Yes. Got what tags there. This will go to the battery. Boys, we are nearly there. She ain't going anyway. That's it. Battery's hooked up. And I'm out of time. I'm done. Cue the B-roll. Home again. Yep, I'm back home again after a 2-week epic adventure with the family, which took us 4,500 kilometers around what I would call WA's Golden Triangle, up through the Pilbara, Karajini National Park, Ningaloo Coast, and then back down. Really good time. There's actually a bit of an after movie that I made for the family, but if you guys want to see it, let me know. It's about 6 minutes long, not too long. 4,500 Ks, 500 Ks of rugged off-road driving, and well, in that time, we found that one of my crimps failed. I'm not scared to admit that one of the crimps to the DC charger failed. 500 Ks of off-road driving will do that to you. A lot of vibrations, a lot of shaking around. Got to say, massive thanks to Shano at Bunbury Off Grid for helping me troubleshoot and getting this setup back up and running. But other than that, really good system. I'm actually super happy with it. So real quick, I'll give you a quick rundown on all the bits and pieces and things that maybe I would change moving forward. So first item, I guess, like I said, DC charger. We did have a fault with it, but it wasn't the unit's fault. That was mine. One of the crimps on the output side of the charger to the auxiliary battery had just rattled and just had a high resistance, which put that into a fault mode. And basically, I just wasn't charging the auxiliary battery from that point. Easy fix. Recrimp the wire, recrimped a fresh wire, I don't trust that old one anymore, and got it back up and running. But before it faulted, absolutely flawless. 25 amp charging, and then it would then taper away as the battery was just about full. I also used a solar blanket with it as well. Remembering just up in here, in that plug, the red plug, is my dedicated solar input, and I was able to use a solar blanket when we were just sort of parked up. One problem with it though. This older model of 25 amp KICKASS charger has a 22 volt solar input limit. So in this particular occasion, I was using a King's 200 watt solar blanket, which has about a 24 volt output. So in full sunlight, that charger would also go into a fault mode because it was over voltage. Not too big of a deal if I put a towel over two of the panels and reduced the voltage input, it charged just fine. But if I had the full panel exposed, it did fault. Now, other brands, you can use other brands of panel. Red Arc, KICKASS do their own. I think iTech and Rome, they all have under 20 volt panels at around 200 watt charge. So you just need to check your specs on that. The new model of KICKASS 25 amp charger has increased its input to 32 volts, so it's no longer a problem. But if you do have one of these old ones, it is a pretty common question among the KICKASS 12 volt guys. And look, it's a problem, but it's not a problem. You just got to match your gear properly. But otherwise, I had no issue with the charger the whole time. It charges perfectly, ramps straight up to 25 amps very quickly in the mornings, and like I say, tapers down as the battery's getting full. So for us, when we had long drive days of maybe 6, 7, 8 hours, it was charging the battery the whole time, and we were nice and full. Now, we ran this fridge as a dedicated freezer, as we had another fridge in the van for our fresh food. Running this as a freezer, particularly once the temperatures went over 40 degrees, it was hungry on power, really hungry, even overnight, going from 100% down to about 70% on the battery. Still got plenty in the tank, but you know, you do need to get some charge in there. If we were parked up for a few days, that solar input was absolutely clutch. The battery, however, let's go over that. It is a 170 amp hour AGM slimline battery, which fits perfectly between the fridge and the dog box. And 170 amp hour is a fairly large capacity battery, but with the AGMs, you only get to use about 50% of it. Lithiums, you can use 80 to 100% of. AGMs don't like it quite so much. You will damage the battery by over discharging. But in saying that, since I put this setup together, it's been running that fridge full time and we haven't had an issue. I think it's down to about 55% today because I haven't been driving much, but if I take it for a long drive to go camping, like I will this weekend, it'll charge up just fine. And there's nothing stopping me from plugging a solar blanket in when we're at home and jack the canopy off and just leave it charging all the time, so that's not a problem. I will, however, be very interested in upgrading to a lithium battery in the future. I've had a look and I think it's ATG do a 200 amp hour lithium battery in the same case, so it will be a direct swap out. and that will give me double my usable capacity, and it'll also have a much higher rated discharge. So this I think has about a 50 amp discharge rating. The lithium has a 300 amp discharge rating, which will work out really, really good when I put that 2000 watt inverter. But in order to keep an eye on that battery, the Victron Smart Shunt absolutely is a ripper piece of equipment. And at around $160, you cannot go wrong. Having access to my battery stats on my phone at any time via Bluetooth really is a handy bit. I would maybe like to have gotten one with the display screen, which I could mount up around here somewhere, and then I could just have a quick access without even having to pull my phone out. But the app really isn't difficult to use, so I do recommend that product if you are looking for a battery shunt or a battery monitor. And things that I put on after filming really quickly were the lights. So these hardcore tricolor LED lights, which give you your bright orange, mild or warm white and cool white setting. Really, really handy. Dimmable. Gets rid of bugs when you got them on dim and on orange, but you've still got light to see what you're doing. I really do rate them. I have one on either canopy door, and then also I have an interior light on the switch, which is this one here, and that is just a single color white, because I figure if I need to use the interior light, it's because I really do need to see, so white is going to be better than the orange. Overall, guys, super pumped with my effort here, and you know, this is something that's fairly easy for you guys to do at home, and I think will last me years and years to come. I just need to decide now whether I'm going to put a tent on top of the canopy or if I just put a solar panel on, because that is something that I want, a full-time solar panel just to keep the battery topped off at all times. Solar panel, lithium battery, they're the two main upgrades that I really want to do on this setup to move forward, as well as installing that inverter, which has arrived now. Thanks, KICKASS, appreciate it. Then I guess is the idea of what do I do with all of this? It's great having the flexibility of open space, and we did go camping just with like some plastic tubs in there, but I'm thinking it might be a really nice idea to fit up a set of drawers and maybe a small pantry setup, just so that when I do want to go camping, I don't have to pack. It's going to already have cutlery and some dry goods and stuff in there. All I have to do is just put the canopy on and hit the bush. That's going to be for a much later time. We've got so many projects to get stuck into. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I hope you've enjoyed this D-Max mini series. It's over for now, but I will get back onto it at some point. For those of you who weren't so keen on the 4v stuff, don't worry, we've got some massive performance street car news coming up, and we've got a project that honestly, it's shocked me. I don't understand how we've gotten to this place. Bite off more than you can chew, and chew like fuck. That's all I'm gonna tell you. But until the next one, we'll catch you around. Cheers.